Hey, podcast friends, if you've been enjoying the College Admissions Process podcast, I'm excited to share my new book, Straight from the Admissions Office Insider Strategies for College Applications. It's packed with insights and tips from over 250 podcast episodes with admissions professionals designed to make the college process less overwhelming. Whether you're a student, parent, or college counselor, it's a valuable resource for navigating the admissions process. By grabbing a copy, you're also helping to support the podcast. The links are in the show notes. Thank you, and best wishes to all with the college admissions process. Welcome to the CAP, the College Admissions Process Podcast. I am your host, John Durante, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome back Bailey Gabrish, who's the Assistant Director of Admission at Tulane University. Now, Bailey was with us back on episode 33, so I am so honored and happy, Bailey, that you're back to give us a follow-up episode. Thank you again, and how are you today?
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I'm good. I'm really excited to be back, especially after speaking a while ago. So it's kind of great to be back with a familiar face. And I know I still have students who reach out to me that listened to my first episode. So I'm excited they can get a little update.
Well, that's so cool that people are still listening. And yes, if you haven't heard episode 33, definitely give it a listen. But again, we're happy to have you back, Bailey. And I know that you are a graduate of Tulane. You mentioned that the last time. And now having worked there for so many years, what would you say are some of the things that you love about Tulane University?
So when I first started looking for jobs after college, I really only had two requirements. And those requirements were that I wanted to be in a place with a beautiful environment and I wanted to be in a place with welcoming people. And having gone to Tulane for undergrad, I knew that Tulane would fit the bill. And so that's why I was applying for jobs at Tulane in the first place. I get to be in a place every day where the weather is warm. There are hundreds of live oak trees, a park across the street. I'm in a historic building. So it's it's really just an inviting environment, and being in a place that's beautiful makes me feel good about the work that I'm doing. Beyond that, I would say one of my absolute favorite things about Tulane as a student and as a worker is the way that New Orleans is really integrated into the campus experience, whether that's academically by having New Orleans focused classes, socially, having our own festivals on campus, or even just by encouraging students to get off of campus, whether that's for service or for anything that's going on in the city. And I think you can go to school in a lot of really cool places, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that school is going to bring the culture of that place to you. But at Tulane, I've always felt like I'm not just a student or I'm not just an employee, but I'm also a member of the New Orleans community.
Well, that's fantastic. And Tulane is definitely a real cool place to go to school. I know a lot of students that have graduated and that are currently there, and they absolutely love the experience. And I also appreciate how you talked about you developing your own requirements or coming to what your requirements were in terms of which school you wanted for yourself. And I think that's important for our listeners to know that it's not important to worry about where your friends are going, perhaps where a parent went, but to identify for yourself, students, do you want to be close to home? Are you okay with being far? A car ride, an airplane ride? Do you want to be in a city, a rural area, suburban area? These are things that you really have to reflect upon. And the beauty is that there's no one answer that is true for everyone. And the great thing about that is that there's over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States alone. There's a school for everyone. Not every school is necessarily for every student. So I appreciate you sharing, your own reflection and your own requirements. That's awesome. And Bailey, getting back to Tulane itself, can you tell us about any recent developments or changes at Tulane that prospective students and their parents should be aware of since our last conversation?
So I think the biggest change since our last conversation is we have a new dean of admission in, and he's really focused on making the Tulane admission process more accessible to students. A few years ago, Tulane was really well known for relying heavily on early decision applicants to fill the majority of our class. And while ED students last year did still fill the majority of our class, one of our goals is to continue to pull back slightly on how much of our class is from early decision. And it's something that a lot of us in the office are really excited about because it gives us more room in early action and regular decision to admit students who might not want to apply ED or who might not have the ability to apply ED.
Understood. And by the way, I recently read that Tulane's retention rate is an astonishing 94%. The national average is about 70%. So, you're definitely doing something right within the admissions office to get the right people on your campus. And you're absolutely doing something right to keep them happy once they're there. So, Bailey, what's the secret? What is Tulane's secret in terms of keeping the students happy and wanting to return year after year?
I think personally, what kept me happy when I was a student at Tulane was that I never felt like I was just another number. I really felt like I was cared for as an actual person, and that Tulane and the people there went out of their way to make my Tulane experience a good one. And honestly, Tulane has so much programming for students, from concerts to festivals to study breaks during finals time. But then on a more personal level, you also have the opportunity at Tulane to really get to work closely with faculty and staff who can support you along the way. Especially having that 8-to-1 student to faculty ratio, you really get to know your professors. I have professors to this day that I still talk to, who check in with me, who offer to write me letters of recommendations, who give me life guidance. I mean, I remember my junior year of college, I was just really overwhelmed. I was going through a tough time. And not just one, but multiple professors actually pulled me aside and said, "Hey, come to my office hours just to talk, not about school or about class, but just to talk about life." And I think that went a long way for me, especially going to a university that was far from home and far from family. And I think that Tulane cares for you like family. And I can say that even so many people after they graduate, those ties to Tulane and the faculty and fellow students still remain.
And I love that you shared that the student to faculty ratio is 8-to-1, which is another astonishing statistic that a lot of times in the college research process, students, when you're looking for your own school, sometimes you neglect to ask questions like that. And I think it's important because, like Bailey described, in junior year, she was having some, difficult times, as many of us do. And the professors were basically an extension, right, of her own family. Would you agree with that, Bailey?
I would definitely agree with that.
Well, we appreciate that insight. And of course, during our last conversation, you mentioned that the huge draw for you to attend Tulane was visiting during campus preview day while hearing the jazz band playing and all the great festivities going on. You were hooked and felt connected to the culture and traditions in the great city, of course, of New Orleans. So, Bailey, if a student is able to visit Tulane, what are some of the must see areas to help a student determine whether or not Tulane is, in fact, the right fit for them?
I would say exploring the city is a huge factor. New Orleans is a very different city from any other city that I've been to. And we really do say that New Orleans is not for everyone, and that is totally okay. So, some places that I would say are important to see in the city would be the French Quarter. Honestly, a lot of students don't frequent the French Quarter, but it is kind of a cultural hub and neighborhood in the city. So, I always recommend stopping in to see it. Magazine Street, which has a lot of great New Orleans food and shops. And I would recommend visiting a green space in the city. We have Audubon Park that's right across the street from Tulane's campus, so you kind of get to see multiple different sides to the city. When it comes to on campus, I would definitely recommend getting in contact with a current student before your visit. And we have a whole website that has all of our student ambassadors listed online. You can sort through them based on their major, based on their interests, and that way you can connect with a student who has similar interests to you. But they're going to be a great resource to really get that current experience, that most up to date knowledge of Tulane. Beyond that, I would say going into any academic spaces is going to give you an idea of what classes look like at Tulane, especially because of our small class size. You're going to kind of get to see what an intimate class looks like, and that can be helpful for students who might not know what size university they want to go to just yet.
Well, that's terrific. And I love how you talked about getting in contact with the student ambassadors. And you could get a student ambassador based on your intended major because their major, the student ambassadors, that is, are listed. So, Bailey, you know that anything that you want to share in terms of the Office of Admissions or the list of the student ambassadors, if you want to send it to me, and of course, I'll make it available to the students and parents in the show notes. You also mentioned, Bailey, during our last conversation, how each geographic region has only one admissions counselor from Tulane, and how developing a positive relationship with your admissions counselor is important as it can help you through the process. So, Bailey, can you share what are some of the things that students do to demonstrate their interest in Tulane, and how can this help in the application review process?
I'll start by saying that every school is different, and while Tulane is a school that looks at demonstrated interest, not every school does. So you'll definitely want to make sure with which schools on your list consider demonstrated interest and which don't. I always say that demonstrated interest is showing genuine interest in a university. So emailing me after you listen to this podcast to say, hey, Bailey, I'm demonstrating my interest from whatever your name is, that's not demonstrated interest. But any way that you interact with us is considered demonstrated interest, whether that's going to an event in your area, attending a virtual event, visiting campus, which again is just an option, but it's not necessary, or writing the Why Tulane essay in your application. But I always say do whatever events that you're genuinely interested in. You don't have to feel the need to attend every single virtual event just to demonstrate your interest.
Fantastic, Bailey. That's great advice. And it's not only about demonstrating your interest, students, if in fact you're for real, but demonstrating your genuine interest. We appreciate that insight, Bailey. So, what are the different ways that a student may apply to Tulane? And is there a benefit to applying one way over the other? You touched upon ED a little bit earlier, but I'm just curious again, is there a benefit, whether it's related to being admitted or for merit based scholarships?
So we offer early decision one, early action, early decision two, and regular decision. And there's honestly pros and cons to every single application round. If you're 100% sure Tulane is your number one choice, and if it's a financially viable option for you and your family, then go ED, because ED is going to show the highest amount of interest that you can show. And out of our rounds, it does have the highest acceptance rate. But early action still shows a really high amount of interest. And the benefit of early action is that we tend to allocate more merit scholarship to EA rather than ED. So ED students can still get merit, but they tend to be smaller awards. So if you're looking for the benefit of merit scholarship, then I would suggest early action. And students who are deferred from early action have the option to switch to early decision two later on. So if you're a little bit on the fence, I always recommend going early action first, and you might have that opportunity to switch to early decision two later on.
Well, that's great advice. I love what you said that if you apply ED, you're showing the highest amount of interest. However, applying early action, there's more merit based scholarships in that round. Is that correct, Bailey? I just want to make sure that I had that correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Fantastic. And then if all else fails, you could then apply early decision two. Now, is early decision two something new for Tulane, or you had that?
We've had it for a couple of years. It just recently became a guaranteed round, though. In the past, we would kind of announce it on a year by year basis, but it is an official round. So students can also just apply outright ED2 if they wanted to.
Understood. And thank you so much for that clarification. And you also mentioned that you recalculate the GPA, as many schools do, that's given on a high school transcript, likely because with so many high schools throughout the country and beyond, there is no unified way that GPAs are calculated by all these schools. So, Bailey, when looking at the transcript, which of course is the academic portion of the overall application, what are the things that you are looking for? And does that differ based on a student's intended major?
So because Tulane does not admit directly into a specific school or major, we review all transcripts exactly the same way. Being that we do a holistic review process where we consider all the different pieces of your application, we tend to analyze the transcript a little bit deeper than just looking at your GPA or letter grade in a specific class. So when I'm looking at a transcript, I am typically looking at your rigor of courses, and I'm also looking at trends in grades and classes. So if I see a student has access to AP, IB, honors courses, I'm going to see if that student is taking any, and if so, how many they're taking. And this is all in the context of someone's school. So if a student is at a school that only offers two AP classes, for example, and they take one of those AP classes, then they've taken 50% of the AP classes offered at their school, which is a pretty good percentage if I say so myself. But I'll also look at trends. And what I mean by that is whether the grades have gone up, have they gone down over time. Oftentimes, I see students who had trouble transitioning into high school, so they might have lower grades freshman year, but then in junior year, they're in three AP courses and they have all A's. And that's a situation where I'd probably say that a student's GPA is not necessarily reflective of their abilities because they improved so much over time as their rigor increased. The same applies if a student had a semester or a year where something was going on in their personal life that impacted their grades. I can make an assessment based on that context that maybe the student had a rough year for a specific reason, but then if they get back on track with their grades, that looks good to us.
Well, that's terrific, and I appreciate how you talked about if there was something that happened in the student's personal life that you would take that into consideration. But I think it's also very important to remind students and the parents that if in fact something happened, you have to let the admissions people know what happened at some point in the application. Otherwise, if there's a dip in your grades, you're leaving the admissions people to speculate as to why, for example, in 10th grade, you scored low in, fill in the blank in terms of which course. Is that right, Bailey? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say share what you're comfortable sharing.
Right.
But, most students do go ahead and share that personal context with us to give us a reason as to why the grades may have dropped.
Well, we appreciate that. And you touched upon it briefly before, giving the example of, 50% of the AP courses that a student took if there was only two. But when reviewing applications from various high schools, how do you take into account when one student school offers close to 30 and yet another one's offers only five?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we're looking at every student in the context of their own school. So when we say that we want to see rigor on a transcript, that means whatever rigor looks like at your specific school. So we're never going to penalize a student who doesn't have access to higher level classes, and we would also never compare side by side two students that go to different schools and don't have the same course offering.
Well, we appreciate that, Bailey. And beyond academic achievements, what kind of extracurricular activities or experience do you value when evaluating applications? And does it differ based on intended major?
There is no one size fits all when it comes to extracurricular activities or experiences. So we don't expect everyone to be a rocket scientist and a drum major of marching band and have all this service on their resume. We just don't expect you to do everything. What we're mainly looking for is the quality of your involvement. So whether you were consistent, if you ever held a leadership position, what your role might have been in a specific organization. So, for example, did you help to increase membership or did you complete a specific project for a certain organization? And the main goal is to pull out characteristics about who you are. So, like I said before, while we're not necessarily admitting you into a specific school or major, we might look at a student who says they're interested in studying business and see on their activities list that they were in a business related org and say, oh, this student is someone who might be really career oriented. But it doesn't necessarily matter whether you do or don't have extracurriculars that pertain to a specific major. It won't hurt or help you. It just gives us more clarification as to the type of person you might be.
Well, we appreciate the clarity in your answer. And during your time in admissions, you've likely seen a wide range of application essays. Bailey, are there any common pitfalls that you recommend students avoid in their essays? And what qualities or themes do you find resonate well in the people in your admissions office?
I think the most common pitfall I see is that students feel like they have to write about a hardship they faced in order to give us a compelling story. And I just don't think that that's totally true anymore. You are totally welcome to write about a time you may have struggled with something. But I think more so now in admission, what counselors really want to read about is something that you love. Because again, at the end of the day, the point of the application is to get a sense of who you are from just a few pieces of paper. And while we can understand who you are as a student from your transcript, or we might get a sense of some of your interests from your extracurriculars, we really don't get to know all there is about you. And I see a lot of students who will talk about how they play soccer, for example, in their activities list. And then they write their personal statement about a time they got hurt playing soccer. And I never learned anything new about them. Also, sorry if you play soccer for picking on you, but that's the
I
example I
love
always
soccer,
use.
by the way, Bailey. It is my favorite sport.
But if that same student who played soccer wrote their personal statement about how much they love comic books and why they first got into comic books, I would say, oh, okay, that's cool. I'm learning something new about this student that I wouldn't otherwise know. And it helps to humanize you on the other end because now we actually feel like we're getting to know something about you. So I would say try and go for something that you love in the essay.
Well, I love that. Write about something that you love and remember that each part of the application really should build on the next. And I love the example you provided where if you're a soccer player and your activity sheet shows all those things that you did within soccer, and then your essay talks about the fact that you love soccer, it might be a missed opportunity, right? You use the example of a soccer player, so the activity sheet shows that, but maybe there's a student that's really into comic books, right? Whether they collect them, they write them, they're a designer, whatever. That shows something different. And I think it's a good reminder to students that when someone reads your essay, if they haven't learned anything new about you, it's really a missed opportunity. Would you agree with that, Bailey?
I would 100% agree with that.
I appreciate that, and those are great answers. And if I may, I was curious on the other side, the recommendation letters. How many do you want at Tulane? And if somebody wanted to submit more, maybe a member of the clergy, is that something that Tulane encourages or accepts? How does it work, if I may?
So we only require the guidance counselor letter of recommendation, but of course you are totally welcome to submit more if you want, whether that's from a clergy member, from another teacher, from someone that you might have worked with if you have a job. So we welcome any extra letters of recommendation. I usually say after about two or three, they all kind of start to sound the same. So you don't have to feel stressed about giving us 10 extra letters of recommendation. But theoretically, the only one we require is from your guidance counselor.
Understood, and we appreciate that clarity. And Bailey, can you explain what opportunities Tulane offers students that may have had an IEP while in high school in terms of helping to ensure that they continue to be successful once they're on your campus?
Yes, the best resource for students looking for accommodations would be the Goldman Center for Student Accessibility. And they work with students looking for accommodations that are academic, housing related, dining related. One great resource they have is a testing center where students can go if they have exam accommodations like time or environment or format. They also have a peer mentor program. They have a learning specialist in house and other student programming like note taking skills sessions or wellness for students sessions that you would have access to on campus.
Well, that's fantastic. And again, Bailey, as you know, we put any links in the show notes. So if there's anything that you want to include, such as the Goldman Center for Student Accessibility, again, just provide it to me and we'll make it available in the show notes. Bailey, you're awesome. I'm so glad you came back for a second episode. Unfortunately, it does lead us to the last question, which is what are your top three pieces of advice you would provide a student and their parents getting ready for the college admissions process?
So, my number one piece of advice for parents is to let your student take the lead in this process. We love parents, but the ones we really want to hear from are the students themselves. And pretty soon, those students are going to be away at college on their own. So now's a great opportunity to let them learn some of the skills they're going to need for when they aren't living at home with you 24/7 anymore. When it comes to students, I would say one big piece of advice is to make a college comparison sheet. There are just way too many schools out there to remember all of them, and they are all different. So, making a sheet that has everything that you're looking for, whether it's price, to if they offer your major, location, application deadlines, that's going to help you stay organized in the process, but it's also going to help you pare down which schools are really in your top 5 or 10. And then finally, my biggest piece of advice to students is to control what you can control and don't worry about the rest. The college process can be a very stressful time, and there's just a lot of things that are honestly out of your control. At this point, your grades are what they are. You can't control a university's admission goals or what your guidance counselor writes in their letter of recommendation. So put time into focusing on what you have control over, whether that's your essays, how you write your activities list, how you reach out to your counselors, and don't stress about the rest, because at the end of the day, just remember that if you don't get into a specific university, it doesn't mean that you're not a good student. It might just mean that there were factors at play that were out of your control. So do the best that you personally can and be proud of yourself for that.
Well, those are great pieces of advice, and particularly that last piece. I really hope that the students and parents heard control what you can control. If you're filling out applications, most likely your grades are what they are, but you could work on that essay. You could always cultivate the activity sheet and anything else, but control what you can control, and also know that each school has admissions goals. And so, as great as you are, there might be a reason why you can't be accepted. Perhaps there's a certain percentage that a particular school can accept from out of state. Perhaps it's something else. Again, that's out of your control. So just enjoy the process the best that you can. And Bailey, I can't thank you enough. You are truly awesome. I've seen you at so many college fairs now, and it's great that you were back for the second time. And I'm so happy because I know that this is going to help so many students and their parents as they navigate through the process. Take care, Bailey. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. And one last thing to say to all the students and parents, good luck out there with your college search. Take care, everyone. Best wishes. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the CAP, the College Admissions Process Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please don't forget to tell a friend and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. I am your host, John Durante, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the CAP.